Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the slight delay in getting our meeting started here this morning, but as you may have seen, there's a lot of paper flying around. We have a lot of amendments to bills that we're going to be execing here this morning. And as you probably also noticed, there's a lot of activity happening here on the State House complex this morning with bills being heard in other committees and rallies being staged to support or oppose those bills in other committees. So it's a busy morning. But let's start our day the way we customarily do by standing and joining Representative Doug Thomas as he leads us in the pledge. Okay, so our job here this morning is to pass judgment on 12 bills we received from the Senate. We've had public hearings on all 12 bills, and we have amendments to propose on several of these bills. Now, the bills have been listed in numerical order, but we may not take them up in that order because there are additional amendments that still may be in the pipeline. So we may have to take things up out of order in order to allow the pipeline to deliver its contents. And to prove my point there, we're going to take up Senate Bill 225 first. So I'm going to open an exec session on Senate Bill 225, and I recognize Representative Troy Murner for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move ought to pass on Senate Bill 225.
Chair recognizes Representative Nodder.
I second the motion.
Chair recognizes Representative Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I propose amendment 2023-1397H, which corrects a minor error at the beginning of the bill.
So it's been moved and seconded that we resolve to judge House Bill 225 as worthy of ought to pass, subject to an amendment. And so the question now is on the amendment at 2023-1397H, which essentially just corrects a mistake made by OLS. And we know that OLS does a fantastic job and very seldom makes mistakes, but they are human and we all make mistakes, right? So is there any discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk if he's ready. Wait a minute. Okay. We're about to call the roll on the amendment to Senate Bill 225. We are doing government work, so it does require a form, as you all are well aware.
1397H. Okay.
So the clerk is now ready to call the roll on Amendment 1397H to Senate Bill 225.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Brezhny,
Yes.
J.D. Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee, Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Cretion,
Yes.
Lucius Partial,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
20-0.
Yes.
Oh, Chair, excuse me.
Mr. Chair,
Okay, by a vote of 20 to nothing, the amendment 1397H is adopted. And we'll now have to call the roll on the question of ought to pass as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing Wendy Thomas, Representative Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking about this bill last night because apparently I don't have a life. And remember the question I asked about the date? The committee ending on November 1st and the report being due on November 1st. The reason that was an issue for me, and I'm not trying to be a pain in the butt, even though my dad says that's my middle name, but if you issue the report and you've got questions on this complex report, who do you ask your questions of if the committee has been dissolved?
Good question. I think that even if the committee is dissolved, the members of the committee who have signed the report would be available to answer questions.
One would
It's no
certainly
different
hope.
than any other report that we,
Well, I mean, it's not
it's
enough for me to vote against this, but it's just, I mean, your explanation yesterday was that this is the way it's always done. Perhaps we should relook at the way it's always been done. I'm just,
okay, good suggestion. By the way, we can't really move on without a motion and a second, so I'm going to recognize Representative Murner to make a motion.
I make a motion that we ought to pass Senate Bill 225 as amended.
Representative Nodder.
I second the motion.
So it's moved and seconded now that we resolve to judge this bill OTPA. Now, further discussion.
I'm done. I said my.
Okay, Representative Murner.
Yes, I was part of the commission. And the reason, first of all, we had a commission instead of a committee, the bill was in the second year of the session, so we went with the commission. And we thought we could get this thing done by last November. And as you see in the report, we had a ton of material. We met quite often over at DRA all summer and into the fall. And we knew that we got a lot of things ironed out, but we still have a little bit more to go, as was in testifying yesterday. So it's going to be the same players all back at the table, and we're going to try to get this thing wrapped
So
up.
can I?
You're recognized, Representative
Thank you.
Wendy Thomas.
I completely understand that. I mean, which is why, I'm going to vote for this bill to go forward. However, we've all recognized that this is going to be a very complex report, and I'm assuming it will generate questions.
This is a very complex thing when it came to the tax, and I don't think there's only a couple of members here. When we did 700, and in the month of October, we kept track back when we had a retained bill on this, which we deleted this section of that. And I think Mike can testify that we had 13 hours of work on a work study that fall, just trying to iron out things. And we still didn't get anywhere. And then we had to put a committee together and through Ways and Means, and they ended up getting this bill done. And it took another, I forget, like close to a year to get it all ironed out. So this is the last piece of what we're trying to get done.
Okay,
Yeah, no, I appreciate
I think we're in a basic agreement here, so. I'll ask the clerk now to call the roll on the question of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 225.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Brezhny,
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Creation,
Yes.
Lucius Partial,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
Yes,
20-0.
by a vote of 20 to 0, the committee resolves to report out Senate Bill 225 as ought to pass as amended, and without objection, will go on the consent calendar. No objections recorded, so SB 225 goes on consent. I'll close the exec session on SB 225. And now we can open an exec session on Senate Bill 16. And I will move the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 16 and recognize Representative Thomas.
Second.
It's moved and seconded that we pass or judge Senate Bill 16 to be worthy of ought to pass. And I also move amendment number 2023-1408H and recognize Representative Thomas.
Yeah. Second to adopt.
So it's been moved and seconded that we adopt Amendment 1408H. So let me explain this amendment. Basically, what this amendment does is it adds a sunset date to the legislation proposed in Senate Bill 16. And at the suggestion of Representative McWilliams, we made this a 6-year sunset period. And so the repeal takes effect on July 1st of 2029, which will be roughly 6 years from the date of its passage. So that's what the amendment does. Discussion on the amendment. Seeing Representative Wendy Thomas.
No, just that I appreciate that it's at the end of a term, which is what Representative McWilliams had suggested. So thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of adoption of amendment number 1408H.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Brezhny,
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Creation,
Yes.
Lucius Parshall,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
20-0.
By a vote of 20-0, Amendment 1408H is adopted. I now move ought to pass as amended and recognize Representative Thomas.
Second.
It's moved and seconded that we resolve to judge Senate Bill 16 as amended by Amendment 1408H to be worthy of ought to pass as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. As soon as he's ready, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ought to pass as amended.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Brezhny,
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Creation,
Yes.
Lucius Parshall,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
20-0.
By a vote of 20-0, the committee resolves to report out on Senate Bill 16 as worthy of ought to pass. Without objection, we'll put this on the consent calendar.
Ought to pass as amended, yes.
Did I say ought to pass? I meant
Yes.
ought to pass as amended, and seeing no objection, we'll put this on the consent calendar. And I will write the committee report. By the way, Representative Murner will write the committee report for Senate Bill 225. And so with that, we'll close that executive session and move on next to opening an executive session for Senate Bill 40. And the chair recognizes Representative Thomas.
Motion to OTP, Senate Bill 40.
Chair recognizes Representative Bernardi.
Second the motion.
It's moved and seconded that we judge Senate Bill 40 to be worthy of ought to pass. I will move Amendment 2023 1373H and recognize Representative Bernardi.
Second the motion.
It's moved and seconded that we adopt Amendment 1373H, and I will now speak to the amendment. This amendment was generated in direct response to comments made during the public hearing that this bill could potentially set a precedent for redefining customer generator to be something different than what it already has been defined in statute as being. So the language on lines 17 through 21 was added to the amendment to specify that a hydroelectric generator that is not the utility customer account of record at the point of interconnection to the electric grid was at one time owned by the current electric utility customer or a prior electric utility customer at the point of interconnection to the electric grid, and that such an hydroelectric generator that is not the electric utility customer account of record submits its initial proposed process and methodology described below to the Department of Energy. Basically, what this amendment does is it restricts this entire bill to two companies, Monadnock Paper and Brookfield Hydro. And the reason that we decided that this was worthy of doing, even though it kind of focuses on two individual companies rather than a broad policy that applies to everybody, is because both of these companies, when their hydro facilities were interconnected to the grid, they were wired in a what we would consider today to be a non-standard manner. And it's too expensive to undo what was done when they were initially wired. So what this bill does is it essentially grants an exception to those two companies. It would be very similar to a zoning board of adjustment granting a variance or an exception to a zoning ordinance. That is a good analogy for what this bill does for Monadnock Paper and Brookfield Hydro. So that's what the amendment does. Is there any need for discussion? Representative Wendy Thomas.
I'm just curious, do you know who did the wiring? Was it a utility or was it a private company that did it?
Well, it was an interconnection to the grid, so I anticipate that the utility did it. But I don't know that for certain. I'm not sure anyone knows that. Does anybody in the audience have any direct knowledge of the answer to that question? I didn't think so. If you really want to know, we could research that, but
Thank you. I'm just curious.
okay, thank you. Further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I guess we can proceed to a vote. So I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of adoption of the amendment 1373H. Hang on, what did I do out of order?
Motions and seconds.
Oh.
We already did them.
Okay, we're good. All right.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner.
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Berejny,
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Cretion,
Yes.
Lucius Partial.
Point of order, we are talking about the amendment.
The amendment, yes,
Yes.
1373H.
Yes, yes.
Tony Kaplan.
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Vose,
Yes.
20-0 on the amendment.
So by a vote of 20-0, the amendment is adopted. That's Amendment 1373H. And I'll now recognize Representative Thomas for a motion on the bill.
Motion to OTPA, Senate Bill 40.
Recognize Chairman Representative Bernardi.
Second the motion.
Moved and seconded that we judge Senate Bill 40 to be worthy of ought to pass as amended. Further discussion? Seeing none, as soon as the clerk is ready, I'll ask him to call the roll on the question of ought to pass as amended by Amendment 1373H on Senate Bill 40.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Berejny,
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Cretion,
Yes.
Lucius Partial,
Yes,
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Bose,
Yes.
20-0.
By a vote of 20-0, the committee resolves to report out Senate Bill 40 as worthy of ought to pass as amended. Vote was 20-0. Shall we put this on the consent calendar, or is it too complex a bill for that?
Consent. There's no fiscal note.
I move.
Representative Harrington?
I think the fact that it is so complex and it took us this long to work it out, there's nobody in this room that wants to try to explain this on the floor of the House. Put it on the consent calendar, please.
Good point. Good point. Okay, on consent it goes. Happily so. I like the way this is going so far this morning. All right. So Representative Thomas will write the committee report for Senate Bill 40. And with that, we'll close the exec session on Senate Bill 40.
Mr. Chair,
Representative Wendy Thomas.
when you say Representative Thomas, could you just please identify which Representative Thomas?
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Representative, we know that Representative Doug Thomas made the motion. So
I know, but if people are listening, that's the only thing.
I am
All
the
right.
taller one.
You are what? The taller
I'm
one.
the taller one, yeah.
all right, so the taller Representative Thomas will write the committee report for Senate Bill 40. All right. Since we're on a roll here, let's move on to Senate Bill 113. I will open a executive session on Senate Bill 113, and I will move ought to pass on Senate Bill 113 and recognize Representative McGee for a motion, for a second.
Yes, I second it.
It's moved and seconded that we judge Senate Bill 113 to be ought to pass as amended. And I now move amendment number 1399-H and recognize Representative McGee. Okay, I'll recognize Representative Thomas then.
Second.
Did you say McGee?
I did.
Oh, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll make a motion to adopt amendment.
Okay, she seconds.
Yeah.
Representative McGee seconds the motion. All right. Sorry I didn't say that clearly enough so that you could hear. All right, it's been moved and seconded that we adopt a motion number 1399H, and since I proposed that motion, I will explain it, the amendment. So what this amendment does is, you'll recall, when we passed HB 549 last year, we put two guardrails in place to check the growth of the system benefits charge. The first one was the 65% electricity energy efficiency improvements. And the other one was the consumer price index inflation adder for the system benefits charge. And to that, we added a 0.25% sweetener. Well, since Senate Bill 113 restricts the 65% limit to yearly or annually instead of lifetime, we felt it would be prudent to tighten up the other guardrail by removing the 0.25% adder. So that's what this bill does, or this amendment does. If you look at line 19, it strikes the language plus 0.25%, all as calculated, and adds the language as determined and verified by the Department of, and of course the rest of that sentence is by the Department of Energy. So that's all the bill does, is it deletes that adder, and this allows us to pass a bill that gives both sides something that they feel is appropriate. And so I urge you to support this amendment, and I would like to hear if there's any discussion. Representative McGee.
Yeah, I just would like to reiterate what I said in yesterday's hearing. I just want to make it clear that the interpretation of the language as being lifetime isn't something that we, lost anything on, because it was really a misreading of what was intended by the 65% rule, which had never been extrapolated to include lifetime before. So I don't feel like it's a quid pro quo, but I do think that the adder is not significant enough for us to quibble over.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of adoption of the amendment 2023-1399H.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington.
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Brezhny,
Yes.
J.D. Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams.
Yes.
Jackie Cretion,
Yes.
Lucius Partial,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns.
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas.
Yes.
Thomas Corman.
Yes.
Ned Reynolds.
Yes.
Chairman Vose.
Yes.
20-0.
By a vote of 20-0. Amendment 2023-1399H is adopted. I will now move ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 113 and recognize Representative McGee.
Yes, I'd like to second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we judge Senate Bill 113 worthy of ought to pass by Amendment 1399H as amended by 1399H. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, as soon as the clerk is ready, I will ask him to call the roll on the question of ought to pass as amended by 1399H.
Doug Thomas.
Yes.
Janine Nodder.
Yes.
Michael Harrington.
Yes.
Troy Murner.
Yes.
John Lewicki.
Yes.
Lex Brezhny.
Yes.
J.D. Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget.
Yes.
James Summers.
Yes.
Kat McGee.
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams.
Yes.
Jackie Cretion.
Yes.
Lucius Partial.
Yes.
Tony Kaplan.
Yes.
Chris Munns.
Yes.
Henry Noel.
Yes.
Wendy Thomas.
Yes.
Thomas Corman.
Yes.
Ned Reynolds.
Yes.
Chairman Vose.
Yes.
20-0.
So by a vote of 20-0, Senate Bill 113 as amended by Amendment 1399H will be reported out as ought to pass as amended, and without objection, we'll put it on the consent calendar. Seeing no objection, on the consent calendar it goes. I will write the committee report for Senate Bill 113. And with that, we'll close the exec session on Senate Bill 113. And since we are on a roll here,
It's an
our
FN.
Representative Nodder.
There's an FN on the bill, so can it go on? I don't think it can go on the consent calendar. It can? Why can't it?
If the FN says that it's indeterminate, that the department can't calculate what the cost can be, then it can go on the consent calendar. For all practical purposes, the FN doesn't exist. Okay. All right. Let's keep this train moving and move on to opening an exec session on Senate Bill 161. And on this bill, I'd like to recognize Representative Murner for a motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move ought to pass on Senate Bill 161.
Chair recognizes Representative Kaplan.
Yeah, I'll second that.
It's moved and seconded that we adopt Senate Bill 161, and we have an amendment. So I will move Amendment 2023-1346H on Senate Bill 161 and recognize Representative Murner.
I'll second the amendment.
It's moved and seconded that we adopt Amendment 1346H. Now, we discussed this amendment yesterday at our work session. This amendment was requested by the Department of Energy, makes a couple of small changes on lines 6 and 15, indicating that the department has the authority and the ability to create rules or orders in order to implement the rest of the bill. And there is a correction in lines 26 and lines 16 on page 2, where the word defined was changed to the word described. And those are the changes that this amendment makes. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Well, seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of the amendment 1346H and its adoption.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Brezhny,
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Cretion, Lucius Partial,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Bose,
Yes.
20-0.
By a vote of 20-0, the amendments 1346H is adopted by the committee. And I'll now recognize Representative Murner for a motion.
Thank you. I move Senate Bill 161 ought to pass as amended.
Recognize Representative Kaplan.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Moved and seconded that we judge Senate Bill 161 to be worthy of ought to pass as amended by 1346H. Further discussion. Representative Harrington.
Yeah, I'll make this quick because I made this point yesterday. I think having subsidized solar for someone making 80% of the area mean income is just way too high. Someone could be making less than that, living in an apartment where it's not even possible to put up solar, or maybe a mobile home or a small house where they don't have the land for it. And they're going to be subsidizing the electric bill of someone who could very possibly be making more money than they can. So I can't vote for this bill.
Further discussion? Representative Kaplan.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion about carve-outs under the net metering provisions, and this is another one, but I think it's our responsibility to do everything we can, especially for low-income people who are suffering high rates, and so this is the least we can do. It's a little bit at a time, and everything helps, and so we owe it to our constituents to get this passed.
Thank you. Further discussion? Representative Munns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just point out that 80% of the average market, our average median income in the state, in most areas, it's between $52,000 and $55,000. The only exception is the Seacoast and Nashua, where it's in the $60,000 range. So I don't think we're talking about people that are making exorbitant amounts of money.
Further discussion? Representative McGee.
I think the last thing I draw our attention to is that this is actually follow through on SB 270 for low income solar from last session. And so it's sort of the follow-on bill of how to implement that for the DOE. And this portion, specifically calls out public housing authorities or housing project that's as described in. So I think we do have guardrails around this in terms of what populace is being served, and it's just it's just giving the rest of the language around it, what percentage of the people in that group would fall into the income categories that would allow them to qualify. So I don't see any problem with the language in terms of anybody getting an undue advantage.
Thank you. Representative Lewicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just echo what Representative McGee just said.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 161, as amended by 1346H.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
No,
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Berejny,
No.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
yes,
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Cretion,
Yes.
Lucius Parshall,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Vose,
Yes.
18-2.
So by a vote of 18-2, the committee will report out Senate Bill 161 as ought to pass as amended. And it will not go on the consent calendar. I suspect it'll go on the regular calendar. And Representative Murner will write the committee report. Will there be a minority report?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harrington will write a
Oh,
minority.
Let me finish, please. I don't think there's any point in not putting this on the consent calendar, so just save everybody some time.
All right, so Representative Harrington thinks we ought to put this on consent calendar. Any objection to that?
The other one would be Lex.
Okay, I guess it does go on the consent calendar after all. So that's 5 in a row on the consent calendar. That's pretty awesome. All right, so we will close the exec session then on Senate Bill 161. I think our path is probably going to get a little rockier from this point forward, but we'll continue on as we've had a pretty good run so far. So let's move next to Senate Bill 166 relative to grid modernization. Well, maybe not. I haven't seen the amendment come through on this one yet.
My amendment or your amendment, Mr. Chairman?
Was that an amendment we discussed yesterday,
Yes,
Representative McGee?
and you said that you thought it was reasonable and that you supported it.
It's 13,
All right, so
it's 1392.
what was the number again, please?
1392.
1392. So it's here somewhere.
Mr. Chairman, I can give a synopsis if you like. It was
All
the
right,
change.
while we're all looking for our copy of 1392, I just found my copy of 1391, which is for 167. While we're discussing that, please, Representative McGee, oh, here it is, 1392. Please, Representative McGee,
When you and I
let's see,
spoke.
we didn't make a motion yet, so wait a
Yes,
minute.
when you and I spoke over the weekend, there was a pending amendment that you had put in with some minor changes.
Correct.
And I took your changes and I reviewed the language that had been submitted to us around how pricing would be considered. And so I added language that I thought would make things more clear on basically how credits would be extended on exports to the distribution grid to reduce retail load. So I read that
Right,
to the committee yesterday, and that was what you said you supported.
correct.
Yep.
So I found it. And so I'm going to make a motion for Senate Bill 166 ought to pass, and I'll recognize Representative McGee for a second.
I'll second it.
And now I'll recognize Representative McGee for a motion on an amendment.
Turn my mic off. I'd like to make a motion to accept Amendment 2023-1392H. On
Okay,
Senate
so
Bill
this amendment
166.
was distributed to members of the committee yesterday.
Yep.
It's amendment number 2023-1392H. I second the motion by Representative McGee to adopt this amendment. 1392H is the amendment number. So what this amendment does, to repeat some of what Representative McGee just said, is it strikes the word "a pilot" on line 5 and inserts 1 to 5 pilots in replacement of that stricken phrase. It then changes the word "may" to "shall" on line 8, and it adds a new sentence on lines 9 through 12 that says that the Public Utilities Commission may approve utility participation in a pilot for transactive energy and distributed energy resources and the associated advanced metering infrastructure as components of grid modernization if the jurisdictional conflicts under paragraph 3 are successfully resolved. And then further down, it on lines 21 through 27, it strikes language that was there previously and replaces it with explanatory language that says that describes how credit for transmission shall be allocated, transmission costs shall be allocated to the distribution utility network customer. And this is all language that Clifton Beeler, discussed with us during the public hearing. And I spoke with Cliff offline about it. I understand it thoroughly, and I agree that this is decent language to add to this legislation. Does anybody else have any discussion on this amendment? Representative Thomas has a question.
With all the confusion of finding this amendment, did we actually complete our motion to adopt OTP?
Yes. I moved OTP, McGee seconded it,
Okay.
and then McGee moved the amendment, and I seconded that. Representative Harrington.
Just a quick comment. This is a good idea, but don't underestimate how much time and work it's going to take. Don't expect something to come out of the PUC in 6 months on this. Trying to find out the exact credit for transmission on distribution, distributed generation is going to be a very technical and time-consuming effort. So just like I say, it's a good idea, but don't hold your breath.
I believe the PUC has a docket open on this question already, so the investigation has already started. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of adoption of the amendment 1392H.
Doug Thomas.
Yes.
Janine Nodder.
Yes.
Michael Harrington.
Yes.
Troy Murner.
Yes.
John Lewicki.
Yes.
Lex Brezhny.
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget.
Yes.
James Summers.
Yes.
Kat McGee.
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams.
Yes.
Jackie Creation.
Yes.
Lucius Partial.
Yes.
Tony Kaplan.
Yes.
Chris Munns.
Yes.
Henry Noel.
Yes.
Wendy Thomas.
Yes.
Thomas Corman.
Yes.
Ned Reynolds.
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
20-0.
Okay, by a vote of 20 to nothing, Amendment 1392H is adopted. And so now we'll move on, and I will make a motion of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 166 and recognize Representative McGee.
Yes, I'd like to second that motion.
Did you second it?
Yes.
Okay, Representative McGee seconds the motion of ought to pass as amended by 1392H. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 166.
Doug Thomas.
Yes.
Janine Nodder.
Yes.
Michael Harrington.
Yes.
Troy Murner.
Yes.
John Lewicki.
Yes.
Lex Brezhny.
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget.
Yes.
James Summers.
Yes.
Kat McGee.
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams.
Yes.
Jackie Creation.
Yes.
Lucius Partial.
Yes.
Tony Kaplan.
Yes.
Chris Munns.
Yes.
Henry Noel.
Yes.
Wendy Thomas.
Yes.
Thomas Corman.
Yes.
Ned Reynolds.
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
20-0.
By a vote of 20 to 0, Senate Bill 166, as amended by 1392H, is adopted by the committee. And without objection, we'll put it on the consent calendar. Seeing no objections or hearing none, this bill will go on consent along with the other 5 we've already put there. And I will ask Representative McGee if she'd be willing to write the committee report on this bill.
Happy to.
Sorry, did you say yes?
Oh, I said happy to. Yes, I'll
Okay.
do it.
Thank you. All right, so with that, we'll close the exec session on Senate Bill 166. So since we're right here, why don't we continue with Senate Bill 167? So I'll open a public hearing on Senate Bill 167 and recognize Representative Thomas.
Doug Thomas.
Representative Doug Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On SB 167, I motion of ITL.
Chair recognizes Representative Bernardi. It's moved and seconded that we ITL Senate Bill 167 relative to green hydrogen energy and infrastructure. And the chair recognizes Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no objection whatsoever to green hydrogen, but the bill contains provisions in there that speak of a tax or subsidy to ratepayers, and that is one area that we don't agree on. But hydrogen is a good idea. We like the idea, but the taxes part of it is something that we just disagree with.
Further discussion, Representative Kaplan.
Yeah, we heard in testimony from Senator Waters when he came to present on this bill that in order to really attract the federal money that's available for green hydrogen, we need to show that we have some skin in the game, so to speak, and that is why those tax credits exist. So I think if we're serious about becoming part of a clean energy system in the region and not being the whole of the donut when it comes to receiving this money, and we've seen that there's a lot of movement around green hydrogen and creating a hub. We need to step up our game, so to speak, and so it's a pretty well-known fact that state participants need to show that they are taking this seriously, and so that's why these credits exist.
Thank you. Further discussion on this, Representative Lewicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, we are talking about something that's purely hypothetical in New Hampshire. There is no hydrogen. There is no one to use it. And whether we should become the venture capitalist of last resort, in my mind, the answer is no. This is, if there are people in industry or wherever who want to start a hydrogen economy, then let's see them do this, initiate it rather than us.
I would make the observation that when government tries to help or regulate technology, it's always too little, too late. And this bill, I think, is a classic example of that. It's trying to pave the way for something that is very little, not well understood at this point in time. And if it's just a chase for money, that's not the purpose of the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. We pass judgment on policy that relates to science and technology and energy, not on chasing subsidies, chasing federal grants, establishing taxpayer subsidies. None of that is part of what we should be doing here. So I can't support this bill for that reason. Representative Harrington has a comment.
Just a quick follow-up to that. We do have a Department of Energy now, and one of their functions is to go after federal money for projects that were there. So we don't need specific legislation to do it. We have a department that's well-equipped to take care of that.
Representative Partial.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would possibly take point in that our job is also to deliver cost savings to the people of New Hampshire. And so our job to some degree is chasing dollars. However, in this particular case, I will vote with the ITL legislation over environmental concerns about interaction of hydrogen not being a greenhouse gas in and of itself, but it does tend to affect free radicals in our upper atmosphere. And it tends to, which should be doing their job of basically working on the methane. And since 2020 was a record year for methane, I'm very concerned about pumping anything in, do any further damage to our atmosphere.
Further discussion, Representative Kaplan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as the free radical question, it's from what I've read, that would only really become a problem if hydrogen became much larger part of our generation mix and our energy system in general. So what this is talking about is what green hydrogen is intended to do is provide the last mile, so to speak, of decarbonization in very hard to reach industries such as cement and steel making, transportation, where the current electric system really, even with a much larger scale of renewable input, would not really be able to take effect. So green hydrogen is seen as an essential part of our move to decarbonize and become a net zero economy. And it's a shame that New Hampshire continues to drag its heels in that transition. And I think it's, as Representative Partial said, it's to the detriment of our constituents and the cost savings that could benefit everybody.
Representative Murner has a comment.
Yes, it was in the papers. We have a big hydrogen plant under construction now up in the North Country, and I brought him here 5 years ago. Was running COA's Economic Development Corporation, and the reason they picked our state, they were from Utah, is because we're business friendly here, and they searched the area to find a site. So I disagree with your comments, respectively, Mr. Kaplan, but we already have advantages here, and they will come here. Thank you.
Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually view the bill a little bit differently. I think, what I heard from Senator Waters in introducing it was that this is an enabling bill that is looking at potential future infrastructure that we don't want to be ignoring. So it kind of sets up in statute consideration for how we would approach it if we were to welcome this type of industry, and to really anticipate that it's coming. I think when we say that's not our job, I mean, if it's not our job, whose? We're saying the Department of Energy. They can't necessarily go after the money unless we've already passed laws in the state that show the federal government that we actually are, preparing ourselves. So I look at it as an infrastructure bill, and I am agnostic in terms of I'm not an expert on hydrogen or green hydrogen or gray hydrogen. I only know what I've read, but I do know that that the fuel mix is changing in the region, and I don't want to see New Hampshire be behind the 8 ball on infrastructure. So I'll be voting on to pass.
Further discussion? Representative Munns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just echo the comments of Representative McGee that, this is an enabling piece of legislation. We're not mandating anything. The legislature for years has utilized the few fiscal levers that it has, such as the business and profits tax, to encourage policies that the legislature believes is in the best interest of the state of New Hampshire. And I would also add that this would be a jobs bill, a way to create good paying jobs that could attract people to New Hampshire to help us address some of the demographic challenges that we have and the resulting fiscal challenges. So I will be also voting ought to pass.
Representative Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I look at this, I think of exactly what we've had before with the electric car debate. We talked about in here, and actually in executive committee discussion here, how, well, electric cars, yes, they use lithium. They have to strip mine lithium, and they have to mine cobalt or nickel or whatever material it is for the battery. That's bad for the environment. But the electric car is good for the environment because it's not putting out CO2 when the car's running. Same way of view, hydrogen would be positive, in my opinion, for the environment. And folks have found blue, gray, and green. And blue and gray comes from natural gas, which 10 years ago in this committee, natural gas was supposedly clean, and it exists. And so it would be no different than lithium bad, cobalt bad, electric cars are good, blue, green, gray, hydrogen, all good. Same thing.
Representative Doug Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a statement that regarding the government's role, I personally feel that we make too many laws, quite frankly. But I believe that unless there's a obstacle or reason why, say, the Department of Energy could not go after a government grant for hydrogen, I say, let the executive branch follow their 10-year strategy, and if they come across an obstacle, then they can come to us and say we need to fix something. But until then, this is almost like a solution looking for a problem. So I think we're on the right course here at ITL is.
Representative Cretion has a comment.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to, agree with my colleagues, McGee and Munns, about our role of enabling infrastructure. I also know that on this committee, what's come up a few times is concerns about much carbon neutral technology not being dispatchable. I think that hydrogen can fill that hole, and as such, we have a responsibility to try to enable it. Thank you.
Representative Reynolds has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to thank my colleague, Representative Cretion, for that point, and just say that when it comes to all this technology and the what the future brings, we don't have to all be experts here on it in order to have the state of New Hampshire make a small move, recognize that this energy technology is an important one that's being taken up around the country. And again, New Hampshire shouldn't be the donut hole, the state that does nothing in the whole Northeast, to send out a signal that we're welcoming this technology or companies that might be interested in this technology to the state. So I'm going to be voting against ITL.
Further discussion? Representative Kaplan, you've made 2 comments already. Do you have anything new to add?
I was just going to use your analogy of the coupons, Mr. Chair, and say that resistance to the state offering a minimal amount of tax credits is like saying you don't want to go buy the newspaper, so you cut out the coupon when you're going to shop for your groceries. I mean, it's that penny wise, pound foolish.
Thank you. Additional comments or questions or anything? Seeing none, I think we're at the point where we can ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ITL on Senate Bill.
It's an amendment.
We don't have an amendment on the floor. The question on the floor is ITL. So I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ITL on Senate Bill 167.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Brezhny,
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
No.
Rebecca McWilliams,
No.
Jackie Cretion,
No.
Lucius Partial,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
No.
Chris Munns,
No.
Henry Noel,
No.
Wendy Thomas,
No.
Thomas Corman,
No.
Ned Reynolds,
No.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
11-9.
By a vote of 11 to 9, the committee report of ITL is adopted, and Representative Thomas will write the committee report, and Representative McGee, will there be a minority report?
Yes.
And who will write that?
I will look at my list and I will tell you in 1 second.
Representative McGee
Tony.
will write the committee report?
It'll be Tony Kaplan.
Representative Kaplan will write the
Yes.
committee minority report. Today is Tuesday. I would ask that all the majority and minority reports be submitted to me by close of business on Thursday. All right, so I'm going to close the public hearing, the executive session now on Senate Bill 167. And let's see if we can do 1 or 2 more before we need to take a break. All right, I guess I'm being lobbied for a break right now. So let's take a 10-minute break and return here at 10:20 for further action on our list of bills to exec today. So committee will reconvene at 10:20. Back to work. Thank you. Okay, so resuming executive session on the Senate bills, we have 5 to go. So we've done 7. We've done 7. We have 5 to go. So with that being the case, let's open up an executive session on Senate Bill 52 relative to the regulation and operation of electric vehicle charging stations. And the chair recognizes Representative Harrington.
Yes, I would move to ITL, Senate Bill 52.
Chair recognizes Representative Summers.
I second the motion.
It's moved and seconded that we ITL Senate Bill 52. Chair recognizes Representative Harrington.
Well, first of all, I have a lot of issues with the bill because it opened up the possibility of people other than those who use the vehicle charging stations paying for them. And I just don't think that should be the case. If people want to pay for them, especially if we're looking at out-of-state people coming up, and they say I think the quote was a desert or something, a charging desert in New Hampshire. Well, they should be able to have a charge such that that's done. Because to me, it's important that the people who use it should pay for it. If you don't have an electric vehicle, you're not getting any advantage out of having electrical vehicle charging stations. And I don't want to see that cost be pushed around to the ratepayers, which is where we seem to head on all these things. It would be no different than if we said, okay, everybody that has an electric vehicle doesn't buy gas, so we're going to charge them so much money to keep gas stations running. I just don't think it's a good idea. I think that these things will come on their own without us subsidizing it through the ratepayers.
Further discussion, Representative Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would note that the bill does not mandate any charges anywhere. It just says potential sources of funding may include but are not limited to, and then lists various things, some of which are specific to EV owners: EV registration surcharges on electricity purchased through public EV charging stations, for example. And in terms of the bill itself and the intent of the bill, we're going to see more electric vehicles coming into the state, both from residents of the state who own EVs and need to charge them and perhaps don't have the wherewithal to do that where they live, either that they're in apartments that don't provide those facilities or they just can't afford to put a charger in at their home. But even more importantly, we're going to see people coming from out of state for tourism. If we do not have sufficient charging infrastructure in the state, what's going to happen is that people from Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, Jersey are not going to come here because they feel like they won't be able to charge up and get home. Our tourism industry will feel it. We will start seeing a decline in our meals and rooms taxes as a result as well, to say nothing of the jobs that the tourism industry supports. So I think that this bill is actually quite essential for the economic future of the state, given how much we rely on tourism.
Representative Doug Thomas has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't totally disagree with my good colleague. However, I have good faith in our free market system and our private industry. And if we got to a point where they saw that their business might be slacking off, particularly during the summertime, I believe they will do what free market does. They will invest on their own and provide what services they believe will keep people coming to their position. So I think that over time, people will do what is necessary to keep their business going. Maybe not to the extent that you feel that we would do it, but I just think the free market will respond when needed.
I would add to that last summer we saw a huge spike in the price of natural gas due to some unpredictable and unexpected geopolitical events. and also due to some policies by the federal government that put the brakes on oil and natural gas exploration and exploitation. So when the price of natural gas spiked, the price of electricity followed it and spiked as well. Well, here we are 8, 9, 10 months later, and the price of natural gas has fallen dramatically. Why did that happen? Because the free market in natural gas prompted producers to produce more of it to satisfy the demand that was out there for natural gas. That's why the price fell. That's why the prices of our electricity are going to fall in the next RFP process. And it's proof positive that the free market works. And I agree with Representative Thomas that in this, Doug Thomas, and that in this particular case, the free market, if there's a demand out there for electric charging stations, they'll get built. No question in my mind about that. Representative Murder.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And in testimony, the head of the Automobile Dealers Association gave a plug to my town. We have a Ford dealer garage in Lancaster, and he solely has invested a major amount of money into a charging station into the town because there's, like you guys just stated, that if there's a need, it's the free market, and if there's a demand for something, they will build it. You know, if there's money in it, they're going to build it. We don't have to subsidize these things. Thank you.
Representative Cretion has a comment.
Thank you. To this point, I don't disagree that business owners will likely begin to incorporate this if they see a demand. However, this seems to me to be an unnecessary burden on our local business owners for something that is infrastructure and seems to me like something that we should be doing, as we provide interstate, as we provide transmission lines, things like that. This sort of infrastructure seems like something we should handle, not something that every corner store needs to do on their own. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Wendy Thomas has a comment.
Thank you. This bill simply sets up a committee. There's no mandates. There's nothing that is going to take away from anybody or anything. It's a committee to look at all aspects of EV charging stations. And just like the hydrogen bill we just discussed, I see this as an enabling and a jobs bill for New Hampshire.
Further comment, further discussion on the motion to ITL, Representative Harrington.
I would just use one example, I guess, to show how things work. If you came to New Hampshire in the summertime 40 or 50 years ago, almost no place had air conditioning. But people started to think, well, we need air conditioning. We want to have air conditioning. People put in air conditioning everywhere. If you went to some place 80 years ago, 90 years ago, there probably weren't that many gas stations. People started showing up with cars, they built more gas stations. We didn't require a government program to get people to air condition their hotels. People did it because they responded to the demands of the public. They'll do the same on this. The government doesn't have to do it.
Further discussion. Representative Munns.
I would also add to that picture of coming to New Hampshire 40, 50, 60 years ago, the fact that if you tried to do that, you were most likely going on very small 2-lane roads. And then the government decided that it was in everybody's best interest to build the interstate highway system. And that was a tremendous boon for New Hampshire's economy. And the private market would not have built that road.
Representative Bernardi has a comment.
Just to comment on the interstate highway system, that was built as a defense mechanism. That was the Eisenhower administration saying we need to have roads where we can move the army from one point in the country to another quickly.
Representative Doug Thomas has a comment.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to the representative's comment that roads, infrastructure, that's built into the Constitution as a responsibility of the federal government. You know, providing charging stations is not. So it's a distinction there.
Representative Corman has a question, comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I understand the point about having the private sector provide much of the equipment, but there's also all the front of the meter equipment and infrastructure that needs to be supplied. And that really is not the responsibility of the private sector. So this is enabling legislation to see how we're going to do that.
So you don't think the utilities, which are private companies, are part of the private sector?
Not entirely. I mean, they're quite regulated, and they're regulated, in fact, by the government, and I think the government needs to be looking into this.
And our Constitution specifies that we want, as a people, to have limited government, right? Representative Lewicki, you had a comment? Okay. Representative Reynolds has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think everyone is making some valid points, but again, I think a lot of this discussion and the objections and concerns about this bill, again, we should always be talking about the bill and what the bill does. And the bill is not to establish a state program of deploying EV charging stations. It's to form a committee to look at some of the issues and get further into them and probably do a service like define what would be the proper limited role, what might be the proper limited role of the state government and responsibilities of the state government versus the private sector or municipal governments. So this bill is to establish a committee to start to think about this issue and help us all understand it more. I don't understand why we keep declining efforts like on the green hydrogen bill to learn more and have a body that would come back and inform us so that we might make better legislation in the future.
Representative Partial.
Yes, thank you. I would echo that for the most part, this is a study committee. It is not legislation. It's to study the issue. And I'm listening to, during the testimony, there's questions about what does it mean by universal access? There were some suggestions that perhaps this might be a good avenue to look at things like road taxes. I think there's many issues to resolve here, and I don't think that just putting our head in the sand saying we think that electric cars are passing fad or something is going to get us where we need to be as a state. We're going to lose out. So I would prefer something, a motion to retain rather than something like ITL.
Representative Nutter.
Thank you. The purpose of a committee is to recommend legislation, and in this case, it would be to grow government, which is against limited government, which is what we believe. And we already have over 150 commissions and committees. We have to pay mileage, which is costing the taxpayers money. And we have paid researchers. Let them do their job. We don't need another committee.
Further discussion? To amplify Representative Notter's point, I think this legislature, I've been in the legislature now for 9 years. I think this legislature has grown somewhat lazy over the years, and rather than put in the hard work to research how to develop effective legislation, there's been a tendency, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, to fall back on the issue of creating a study committee to do that hard work. So instead of each of us taking the responsibility to do the hard work and do the research necessary to come up with good, solid legislation, we want to deflect that work onto the backs of our colleagues who get appointed to a study committee. Study committees very often don't come up with much useful information. Study committee reports very often end up in the circular file. And I think we need to, at some point, say, no, let's break the cycle of deflecting hard questions onto the backs of study committees. Representative Wendy Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This study committee acknowledges that this is a new field that has new experts, and therefore we don't have the answers. And this bill does exactly what we're supposed to do, set up a committee to look at a new field with new experts.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ITL for Senate Bill 52 FN.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner.
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Berejny,
Yes.
JD Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
No.
Rebecca McWilliams,
No.
Jackie Cretion,
No.
Lucius Partial,
No.
Tony Kaplan,
No.
Chris Munns,
No.
Henry Noel,
No.
Wendy Thomas,
No.
Thomas Corman,
No.
Ned Reynolds,
No.
Chairman Bose,
Yes.
10-10.
By a vote of 10-10, the motion of ITL fails. Is there another motion for Senate Bill 52 FN? Representative McGee.
I'd like to make a motion OTP.
Representative McGee moves OTP. Is there a second? Representative Munns seconds the motion of OTP on Senate Bill 52. Representative Munns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce an amendment. Amendment number 1401.
Is there a second?
I second.
Representative Munns moves Amendment 1401H, seconded by Representative McGee. Discussion on this amendment. Representative Munns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment is relatively straightforward. What it does is it removes Section 4 on page 3 of the bill as amended by the Senate, which deals with which provides some direction to the Public Utilities Commission. During the testimony, we heard testimony and we discussed the fact that it would be premature to have the PUC taking any specific actions until the study committee had completed its work. And there seemed to be a general consensus that if this bill were to move forward, that it would be in the best interest to remove that requirement. So that's all that this amendment does.
Quick question. So the amendment just removes, starting on line 22 and going through to line 5 on page 2, just removes text from the original bill.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion?
Just a question.
Representative Harrington.
Yeah, just a question. So just want to get this clear. What you're saying is that the existing bill would have the Public Utilities Commission start an investigation or a process before the commission released its report?
Yeah, that's how I read the bill. It basically said that the commission shall, within 2 years, consider a number of things. And the implication is that that would start immediately. And that just seemed premature, given the fact that the study committee hadn't even done its work yet.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Isn't it true that during the public hearing, it was explained to us that that was old language, that the reference to 2 years was a reference to 2 years following the initial adoption of that statute, and that 2-year period had already expired, and therefore the language that you want to delete is actually obsolete language. It has nothing to do with the performance of the bill as it existed. Isn't that correct?
I don't recall that, but that would make sense and would just be another reason to delete the language.
Further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I guess we'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the adoption of Amendment 1401H.
Doug Thomas,
No.
Janine Nodder,
No.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
No.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Berejny,
Yes.
JD Bernardi, no. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
No.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Cretion,
Yes.
Lucius Partial,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Bose,
No.
14-6.
By a vote of 14 to 6, the amendment 1401H is adopted. The chair now will entertain a motion of OTPA. Representative Munns.
Sorry, I move to adopt the bill with amendment, OTPA.
Is there a second? Representative McGee. Representative McGee seconds the motion of OTPA. Is there further discussion on the bill or on the question of OTPA? Representative McGee.
I think the only thing I would add is we've already discussed the fact that it's a study and people have feelings about adding studies and whether we should be doing the work versus a study. I think everyone on the committee doesn't have to do all of the work, and I think it makes sense on something that we have so many questions about and so many differing opinions that we actually do allow a study to go forward so we can have some of those answers. That's all I'd add.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of OTPA on Senate Bill 52.
Doug Thomas,
No.
Janine Nodder,
No.
Michael Harrington,
No.
Troy Murner,
No.
John Lewicki,
No.
Lex Berejny,
No.
JD Bernardi, no. Tom Ploget,
No.
James Summers,
No.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Cretion,
Yes.
Lucius Partial,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Bose,
No.
10-10.
By a vote of 10, the ought to pass as amended motion fails. The next motion that the chair would entertain is a motion to retain. I personally have no appetite for that, but if the committee does have an appetite for retain, I would entertain such a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to retain.
Representative McGee moves to retain Senate Bill 52. Is there a second?
I would happily
Representative
second
Partial.
that.
Representative Partial seconds the motion to retain. I'll start the discussion by pointing out that we've already retained 13 bills in this committee this year. And that presents a fairly substantial workload for us, either in the month of June, if I can convince the speaker to let us begin early, or starting in the month of September.
Mr. Chair?
So I would just urge you all to keep that in mind as you try to decide whether this bill is worth retaining.
Mr. Chair?
Representative McGee.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I'll withdraw my motion to retain because I think it's fairly unusual to retain a study committee bill. Either we're going to say there'll be a study committee or there won't. So will this go to the floor without recommendation then?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
Okay, so Representative McGee withdraws her motion to retain the bill. Therefore, the bill will go to the floor without recommendation. The motion on the floor will be ought to pass as amended by Amendment 1401H. That will be the first motion. So we
And
need a committee report.
From
Who will write
Representative-
the,
From Representative Corman?
Corman will write the motion for ought to pass,
I'll write the other.
and Representative Harrington will write the motion for ITL. Okay, once again, I'll remind members to submit your committee reports to me by close of business on Thursday. And with that, we'll close the public hearing the executive session on Senate Bill 52. Now we can open a executive session on Senate Bill 54. So Representative McGee and I have been discussing what to do about Senate Bill 54. And we would like to propose jointly that we form a subcommittee to study the issues that were raised in the public hearing that we had yesterday and make a recommendation to the full committee. We would recess the exec committee on this bill today and notice it on a future date, probably the 1st of May. If we did form such a subcommittee, the subcommittee would likely meet next Monday, April 24th. So I would like to hear discussion from the members about whether you think a subcommittee is desirable or if you want to proceed with making a passing judgment on this bill today. Representative McGee.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Do you want me to make the motion for the subcommittee?
No, I
Speak to
don't
the
think we need a motion to do that. I think
No.
what we need is a discussion of whether it's worthwhile.
Yes. I think what happened in the hearing is that we had testimony from varying stakeholders in and around our committee that were in opposition to each other, where decisions need to be made, and greater discussion, I think, and understanding needs to be obtained by this committee before we can say that we're comfortable putting through a bill that's kind of a sea change in terms of policy. So some of those open questions require additional examination for us to be sure that what we're passing is going to actually have the effects that we, we agree that we would like to see prices come down. We are not convinced that that will be the effect of the bill before us. And so I think we just want to do a little more due diligence before we let the bill pass through the committee.
Further discussion on the question of whether we should form a subcommittee to look further into this bill. Representative Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going off of what I said yesterday, that I'm in favor of helping the ratepayer any way we can. And there was the couple lines where I said it would have to be stricken before I'd ever go for it. And that was line 18 and 19. So if there was any work to be done to where the ratepayers were not responsible for the difference between the agreement payments and proceeds through uniform annual factors and rates, then I think it'd be worthwhile.
Representative Kaplan.
Yeah, I think it's very worthwhile. I think we're very close to an agreement that would satisfy the people on this committee who have doubts and lack trust in this bill. But I think we're close, and I think given our willingness to work in a bipartisan fashion, as we've seen today, that we ought to set something up. Also, we heard yesterday in committee that there's a bit of a state of emergency in the energy markets, so we should be working in a timely fashion to get something passed. So I think we should put our money where our mouths are. Speaking from my side of the aisle, I think it's time that we maybe, we've been talking about renewables being the most cost-effective choice for a long time. And I think we need to trust that this is a moment now that we might be able to start to see that. And I think from the other side of the aisle, you've been talking about cost effectiveness and pricing criteria being the sole guideline or the main priority when it comes to policymaking. So again, you need to put your money where your mouths are. So I think in a bipartisan fashion, we could start to work our way through this bill. And right the apple cart of the energy market, which is already being disrupted as we speak. And so this bill is an effort to try to seize the moment. It is a sea change. It is a big bill, but it's an important move for the state, and we owe it to the Senate, who worked in a bipartisan fashion to craft this. We owe it to our constituents to try to do something about electricity rates, and for many of us, it's a priority issue. So yes, I'm in favor of it.
Additional discussion, Representative Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, so yeah, when I think about this bill, I think that its purpose is also for price stabilization, because it would provide a backstop on pricing. As a about to be customer of Community Power, I am concerned about the effect on Community Power, and I would like to see us do what we can to make this bill not hurt Community Power. Representative McGee called me last night and mentioned the subcommittee idea to me and asked if I would be willing to serve on it, and if I am asked to, I am willing.
Thank you. Representative Wendy Thomas has a question or a
Thank you.
comment.
I just want to, so we're recessing this as opposed to retaining it. Is that because we think that we're close to a resolution and we want to get it onto the floor before the end of this session?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
If we retain the bill, it doesn't come to the floor till next fall, next January, basically. But if we just recess this exec session, then we can resume the exec session at a time and date to be noticed in the calendar and move the bill forward this session, this spring. So that would be the goal of doing a subcommittee. Representative McGee.
Yes, and before we go forward with voting on whether to form one, I just wanted to put out there to the committee that one of the things that I suggested to Chairman Vose was that we, by way of process, try to put out a question to all of you to try and let us know, submit to us what your concerns are with the bill, so that we know that we're addressing all of them in our attempts to review it. I mean, we're going to review it anyway, but I think there are certain things that stick out to different of our members, and so we would like to have everyone's concerns addressed in that subcommittee, and it would also expedite the process if we had a list of questions we were trying to solve for. So if you have ideas about, like the suggestion that Representative Summers made about his position on lines 18 and 19, we would like to collect that information just to make the work more speedy. Thanks.
So I'm getting a sense that the committee is interested in pursuing this option, but to be absolutely sure, could I see a show of hands from individuals? Representative Harrington has a question first.
I just want to know if, let's just say we have this and we have that one-day meeting next week, and it still doesn't come to fruition. So is there still the option then to retain the bill?
Sure. As
Okay.
long as the executive session is still open, which it would be, then retain would still be an
Because
option.
one thing I think we need to hear more from is where the PUC is, where they're doing with this and where they're going and how they think it's going to work and so forth. Because obviously they've been involved in this stuff before, and it's going to have an impact on, on them directly. So I don't think we heard from the chair of the PUC on this yet, have we? Okay, sure. The chair of the PUC, did anyone from the PUC speak on this, on the public hearing? I wasn't here for the first, no, I guess I was here for it. They weren't.
No, only the Department of Energy testified on the bill,
All right,
not the
thank you.
PUC. All right, so to be sure, in my mind, that my sense of a consensus is correct, I would like to see a show of hands of people who would like to form a subcommittee and recess the exec session on Senate Bill 54. Please raise your hand. So it looks like we have a consensus. So that is the direction in which we will move. So Representative McGee and I move the formation of a subcommittee for Senate Bill 54 rather. And I would like to appoint the following people to the committee: Representative Corman, Representative Bernardi, Representative McGee, Representative Harrington, and Representative Vose. Without objection, those folks will be the Subcommittee for Senate Bill 54.
Excuse me, what day is this going to be?
Monday, April 24th will be the meeting of the subcommittee.
I'm in Portsmouth that afternoon for an offshore wind commission hearing.
What time?
4:30, but I'm not driving out here and then driving all the way back over there. So you'll have to find somebody else on that one.
Okay, so we'll scratch Representative Harrington.
Isn't that going to be the morning? Subcommittee in the morning?
Yes, 9 o'clock in the morning. So Representative Thomas
I'll be going to the same offshore wind meeting, but,
at 4:30.
right, so I don't think
Jim Summers.
I'll be up here anyway, so.
Okay,
Jim Summers.
How about Summers?
okay.
I'd be willing to,
Representative
just so I
Summers.
can make sure 18 and 19 aren't in there.
All right, so Bose, McGee, Bernardi, Corman, and Summers. Okay, Representative Kaplan.
Just wondering, I mean, this is a split committee, 10-10. Why wouldn't the subcommittee also be equally split between the two parties? Just a question of process.
It's impossible to come up with an even split when you need an odd number of people. Mathematically can't work. So remember, what a subcommittee does is it asks questions, compiles information, and then makes a decision about a recommendation or a series of recommendations to make to the full committee. So the subcommittee will come back to us and say, we recommend that you amend Senate Bill 54 in these three ways. And the committee itself, the full committee, can say yes or no to that recommendation. Or it could even modify the recommendation and say, okay, we'll take two of those, we'll reject one, and we'll add one of our own. That's the kind of thing that can happen. So that's what the subcommittee process is that's how it's supposed to work. And you have to have an odd number of people on a subcommittee so that there won't be tie votes if you end up voting on something. So that's the strategy we will take here. So given that, I will now recess the executive session on Senate Bill 54 to a time and date to be noticed in the calendar. And I will schedule a subcommittee meeting. I will chair the subcommittee, and I will schedule a meeting for Monday, April 24th at 9 a.m. Here, yes, in this room. And to be clear, even though there are 5 members of the subcommittee, every member of this committee is welcome and eligible to attend the meeting and to sit at this table and ask questions if you have them. So even though the 5 members of the subcommittee will actually formulate the recommendations that we will present to the full committee is welcome to attend if you so desire. It is a public meeting, so the public is invited to the meeting as well to listen to the questions that get asked and the deliberations that the committee ends up making. I anticipate that it'll be a pretty full day. The morning will probably be spent asking questions, and then the afternoon will probably be spent deliberating. Well, what do we do with the information we gained? What amendments are we going to recommend, et cetera? Any other questions about how the subcommittee process will work? Okay, I guess we're done with that then. So we're recessed on Senate Bill 54. We can now move on to Senate Bill 68. And the chair recognizes Representative Bernardi for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move ITL on
Chair-
SB 68.
Chair recognizes Representative Murner.
I second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Moved and seconded that we ITL Senate Bill 68, and Chair recognizes Representative Bernardi to discuss his motion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as we've discussed in the hearing, what we're doing here is this continues to expand the concept of making net metering available to a larger and larger subgroup of potential customers, and we did that initially for municipalities where the net metering benefit went back to the taxpayers of those municipalities. In these subsequent bills, that is not the circumstance that obtains. So it is that sort of unrestricted growth is not what we should be doing.
Thank you. Further discussion. I'll remind the members that we did, this bill mirrors HB 139, which came out of committee without recommendation and then was passed on the House floor. And so the position of ITL of the Republican caucus is consistent with our position on HB 139. Further discussion. Representative McGee.
Guess I'll just add this by way of explanation. Yeah, I think originally we had heard, since there were two vehicles that were very similar, one on each side of the wall, that perhaps the one that was coming to us, SB 68, would be the one that would be preferred for passage. But I think it's actually, at this point, it's the other way. I think HB 39 did make it through the House, and the Senate is looking at passing it on their side. So I don't think we, have any further jurisdiction over that particular bill, but in this one, I think it's not necessary.
Further discussion. Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ITL on Senate Bill 68.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Berejny,
Yes.
J.D. Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Cretion,
Yes.
Lucius Partial,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
No.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
19-1.
By a vote of 19-1, the motion of ITL is adopted on Senate Bill 68. Without objection, we'll put this on the consent calendar. Seeing and hearing no consent, this will go on the consent calendar, and Representative Bernardi will write the committee report. And with that, we'll close the executive session on Senate Bill 68. It is now 11:05. We have two bills to go, so I'll open the executive session on Senate Bill 69 relative to allowing certain nonprofits to participate as customer generator group hosts under net energy metering. And I'll recognize Representative Harrington for a motion.
Inappropriate to legislate.
Representative Berejny is recognized.
I second ITL on SB 69.
It's moved and seconded that we ITL Senate Bill 69, and the chair recognizes Representative Harrington.
This is just another expansion of the net metering process that we started. Originally, it was supposed to be up to 1 megawatt. And then we decided, okay, well, we'll allow municipalities to go up to from 1 to 5 with the idea that if they saved money on the electric bill, the taxpayers would save money. Now we're talking about doing it to multiple nonprofit groups, and as people had mentioned before, they're one of the largest employers in the state, so this could really expand. We could be talking about hundreds of megawatts of power, which is net metered, which means, again, it has no obligation to deliver power at any time. When they have the power, it has to be bought at the net metered price. When they don't supply the power, maybe when it's really needed, something certainly like, and we always talk about the winter time here and how desperate we are for electricity in the winter, you're not going to get much out of solar when it's a real cold morning in January, or if it's snowing out, for example. So we just keep pushing it a little bit more. We open the door, now we're going to be, and then we have another bill that says basically anybody can do it. I think we should leave the line where it's been drawn, where it's municipalities only, because that way there is a direct saving to taxpayers on that. And let's face it, everybody that lives somewhere pays property taxes one way or the other. So I just don't see this, and it's just going to exacerbate the problem. We could end up, like I say, hundreds of megawatts of solar that has no obligation to serve at any particular time. And that means we're going to have more reserve power to back that up. And the ISO is going to pay those people to have reserve power, to be there just in case, not running, but just in case. And of course, that's going to be passed on 100% to the ratepayers.
Thank you. Further discussion? Representative Kaplan.
I think I'm just going to use an analogy to try to argue in favor of this bill. I mean, we're trying to build a bridge to the future, and we're halfway across the bridge, and we're calling a pause on construction of that bridge. Yes, solar energy is intermittent and it has problems, but they're not unsolvable problems, and we need to do as much as we can to diversify our generating sources in order to lower prices because of our dependence on natural gas. And so this is one way of doing it. It's not perfect, but it's the way we've started. And as you said, or somebody mentioned, nonprofits are a huge source of economic activity in our state, and we should be doing what we can to help them.
Representative Bernardi.
So to follow up on Representative Kaplan's statement, what we want to do is build a bridge to the future that'll be there some days, but not other days.
Representative Corman has a question or a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, a couple of things I would say. I was thinking last night about Representative Harrington's comments. Representative Berezhny actually prompted me to think of him. Thank you, Representative Berezhny. And one thing I think about is the amount of solar compared with the base load that we already have. It just doesn't seem like that much, certainly not in the near term. And then I'll just repeat something I said yesterday when we were discussing this bill in the work session, which is I'm involved with a nonprofit. And of course, as Representative Munns pointed out, the nonprofit sector is a huge employer in the state. But I am directly involved with a nonprofit as a board member, and actually I was the grant writer. I know how hard it is for nonprofits to survive financially. And I feel like this is something that we can do to help nonprofits. And the question was also raised, well, this is not really helping the ratepayers and the taxpayers. But when you look at who the nonprofits are helping throughout the state, it's a lot of people, not just the people that work for the nonprofits or with the nonprofits. It's a lot of people. And I feel like the benefit of this actually can spread out across a huge swath of the state.
Additional discussion. Representative Reynolds has a question or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, thank you, Representative Corman, for pointing that out. This bill, of course, it represents an expansion of the eligibility for all of our state's nonprofits to take advantage of low-cost solar, which would help a lot of people across the state. And I just need to respond to Representative Harrington's, repeated characterization of solar, that it's not reliable, it doesn't have an obligation to serve. He's not wrong about that, but it's really irrelevant to the question. The characteristics of solar are what they are, and we've been shown by the repeated testimony, New England Power Generators Association, utilities, that solar in the aggregate already makes a substantial reduction in demand across the region. And that reduction in demand has benefits for ratepayers. So we ought to continue to do things that allow private investors to build more solar. No, solar's not dispatchable, doesn't have an obligation to serve, but the natural gas plants are dispatchable. And to the extent that, they can be turned on when needed. So since natural gas is a limited resource and pipeline capacity into New Hampshire and New England is limited, why shouldn't we save the natural gas for when we really need it and have people build solar so that when it is generating and contributes to the grid, it can be taken advantage of? So it's a sort of a false choice that Representative Harrington is presenting us with. We ought to do this, and we ought to do it for the industrial as well. Thank you.
So since you called out Representative Harrington, I'll call on him.
Thank you. Just to clarify, the difference between these, when you're talking about natural gas plants, I know of none that are or almost none that are under 5 megawatts. So they're all dispatchable plants controlled by ISO New England. So the way it works is they'll bid in on a particular hour that I'm going to deliver 100 megawatts of power. And if that clears, then they deliver the power. Now, if that particular day there's a lot of solar being produced and ISO New England says, we don't need your 100 megawatts, well, they're going to say, too bad, you're going to pay me for them anyways. That's the way it works, just because there's extra solar that's not dispatchable. Now, if it's a utility grade solar that's 50 megawatts or something, they'll have an obligation to sell their electricity and deliver it. But if someone has bid in and cleared the market, and it happens to be an exceptionally sunny day or a day that it was supposed to rain and it didn't, and there's a lot more net metered solar around there, it doesn't cut back on you can't tell the natural gas plant, sorry, you can't run today, because they've already bought their gas, they're ready to go, and they've cleared the market, and they're going to get paid. That's just the way it works. And if you tell them not to run, then they're going to get paid anyways. You can't, it's two totally different things, because one has a commitment that they make and they clear the market. The other one runs whenever they can, whenever they want to.
Representative Lewicki has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We hear about the reliability must run and other such plants. And the thing is that the ratepayers are paying for essentially that capacity in excess of whatever the solar may do. And until we have storage, solar is sometimes here, sometimes not. And we heard about the Christmas Eve issue and the other one where we were running really low, and we can't say, hey, solar, come on, Christmas Eve, we need some juice right now. It's 4:00 in the afternoon. It just doesn't work that way. Can't be done.
Representative Bernardi has a comment.
Yes, just to round out what Representatives Lewicki and Harrington are talking about, because solar is not reliable, meaning dispatchable, it does not reduce our overall demand of the amount of power resources we need. There is never any solar during the winter peak. None. Absolutely zero, because in the winter peak, it is dark. Therefore, we have to have another set of reliable power producers 100% throughout the whole year in order to satisfy that peak. So basically what we're doing is saying we need to build out 2 sources of power by this bill. 1 solar and 1 to cover the peak. That doesn't make any sense. We should not be subsidizing that kind of activity.
Just to keep in mind how much space the solar farms take up. So if we wanted to replace all conventional power plants, we would need land larger than the state of California.
Representative Cretion.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring us back to the actual bill. So this is only allowing nonprofits in the state to participate as net metered hosts. We are not talking about replacing all natural gas with solar. We are not talking about anything the size of California. This is just expanding it to a very small additional number of folks. It will save on the peak. We've heard testimony to that effect. We've seen studies to that effect. I don't think we should ignore that. I think we're just getting far off of what the bill will do and into the sort of more controversial aspects of, 100% renewable, which is not what this is talking about.
Representative Murder.
Yes, I agree with her on but there's a large amount of nonprofits. I can't even tell you how many just in the North Country alone. And to the point, just to stay on point of the money, these going on, you'd be surprised how many nonprofits there are that would jump on this. But the other thing we don't understand here, when we talk about cost shifting or whatever, we are paying millions of dollars to have these plants on standby right now. Bo runs twice a year. I could go on and on with all the plants that are on standby right now. And what's going to happen, we still have to pay them because this is not reliable baseload power. And it will expand significantly with nonprofits. I'm sorry, there is an awful lot out there, and I'll just leave it at that.
To follow on to Representative Murner's point, because there are a huge number of nonprofits, and I agree that many of them struggle to survive, but this bill would open the door to allowing consortiums or cooperatives of nonprofits to join into this program of additional net metering because they're nonprofits. And that is a huge expansion, potential expansion of the net metering marketplace when the Public Utilities Commission is still trying to figure out what the net metering tariff should be going forward. And the DOE opposes this bill because they think we should wait until we know what that tariff is before we expand net metering any further. So Representative Munns has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm encouraged that everyone on the committee seems to acknowledge that the nonprofit segment of our economy is large and very important to the overall well-being of the state. And I wanted to thank Representative Corman for highlighting the fact that these nonprofits serve a very large segment of the population. The only thing that I would add to his comment is that New Hampshire is unique among states in that we outsource a lot of what are normal governmental responsibilities to nonprofits. Our social service system has been essentially outsourced to nonprofits. And I think we have an obligation to assist those nonprofits as much as we can to enable them to continue to be able to function and fulfill the mission that we, the state, have asked them to fulfill. So anything we can do to reduce their operating costs will be beneficial to them. And quite frankly, if they want to get together in consortiums, that's the free market at work. And I would encourage them to do that.
Further discussion. Representative McGee.
Thank you. So clearly, our differing perspectives on whether we should be enabling this portion of the clean energy or local energy market is going to continue to be disparate. But what I would say is that on the issue of, base load versus intermittent energy sources, as was stated before, those are the characteristics. And what ends up happening is if you have larger nonprofits like hospitals and that sort of thing, they may end up partnering in such a way as they will invest in storage in order to accommodate being able to dispatch energy when needed. So I think we're not here to prescribe how the market will interpret the laws and the policies that we put in place. We're here to figure out which policies work for New Hampshire. And I think this bill and the next bill were both put in for specific constituencies who see themselves wanting to be enabled in that regard and want to lower their prices. And I think, from my perspective, there isn't a downside to that. It doesn't matter what the tariff is. The tariff will be what the tariff will be. The policy is whether or not these guys are allowed to lower their own costs if they so see fit. And right now, the only impediment they have to that is us.
Representative Doug Thomas has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a classic example of trying to pass a policy before we know how this policy is going to affect everybody. And in reference to the PUC is still doing work on tariffs, we have no idea what this policy is going to do. It may or may not be what we want, or it may increase people's costs. This policy, I think, is premature. We need to wait until PUC acts just like the DOE has recommended.
Representative Bernardi.
Just to comment on Representative McGee's statement. We there is no impediment for any nonprofit or any other organization to begin or build out solar or wind now. What we're talking about is, should we be giving them a subsidy?
Representative Harrington.
I just make a quick comment. We use the word nonprofit fairly loosely, and it just doesn't mean the United Fund or the YMCA. There's an awful lot of nonprofits in New Hampshire. I believe the gun club I belong to is a nonprofit. So when you start taking across the board, there's all sorts of nonprofits, and they're not all out there spending their days making the place a better place for everybody to live. So just be aware of that.
Looks like we're probably not going to change each other's minds on this, but I'll give Representative Kaplan an opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think this is going to change anybody's mind, but I just can't let let it go without comment on the question of tariffs. I think that's a red herring. I mean, this bill is not setting the tariffs. The tariff will be set by the PUC and its docket, and that, I assume, will be retroactive to any bill that we might pass here. So why are we holding up action on something based on we don't know the final cost? I mean, that's not what this bill does. It just allows net metering to be expanded to nonprofits. And I think of, nonprofits as prime candidates for a program like this, seeing that they are nonprofits. So
I would comment that, with all due respect to my good friend from Hollis, a policy like this actually sets up barriers to the operation of the free market. And I don't think that that's what we should be doing as a policy committee, is to creating impediments to the operation of a market, which has proved to be very effective for over 200 years in this country. All right, is any further comment on this motion to ITL, House Bill 69? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ITL for SB 69.
Doug Thomas,
Yes.
Janine Nodder,
Yes.
Michael Harrington,
Yes.
Troy Murner,
Yes.
John Lewicki,
Yes.
Lex Brezhny,
Yes.
J.D. Bernardi, yes. Tom Ploget,
Yes.
James Summers,
Yes.
Kat McGee,
No.
Rebecca McWilliams,
No.
Jackie Cretion,
No.
Lucius Partial,
No.
Tony Kaplan,
no.
Chris Munns,
No.
Henry Noel,
No.
Wendy Thomas,
Nope.
Thomas Corman,
No.
Ned Reynolds,
No.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
10-10.
By a vote of 10 to 10, the motion by ITL fails. Is there any appetite for OTP or retain?
I'd like to make a motion, OTP.
Representative McGee moves OTP. Is there a second? Representative Corman moves seconds the motion of OTP. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of OTP. As soon as he has filled out the requisite paperwork and forms, necessary to the purpose of calling the roll on the question of OTP on Senate Bill 69.
Doug Thomas,
No.
Janine Nodder,
No.
Michael Harrington.
No.
Troy Murner,
No.
John Lewicki,
No.
Lex Berejny,
No.
JD Bernardi, no. Tom Plauché,
No.
James Summers,
No.
Kat McGee,
Yes.
Rebecca McWilliams,
Yes.
Jackie Cretion,
Yes.
Lucius Parshall,
Yes.
Tony Kaplan,
Yes.
Chris Munns,
Yes.
Henry Noel,
Yes.
Wendy Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas Corman,
Yes.
Ned Reynolds,
Yes.
Chairman Bose,
No.
10-10.
By a vote of 10 to 10, the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 69 fails. Is there any appetite on the committee to retain this bill?
No.
One would hope not, since we have a heavy load already. So this bill will go to the floor of the House without recommendation. Who will write the calendar report for the motion of ought to pass? Representative McGee?
Representative Munns has offered.
Representative Munns will write the ought to pass motion. And Representative Harrington will write the ITL motion.
Mr. Chair, what was the deadline on that again?
Thursday at 5 p.m. All right, one last bill to go. Well, let me close the executive session on 69 first. Now we'll open a executive session on 79, Senate Bill 79, which is a very similar bill to the one we just did. Instead of nonprofits, it opens the door to
Commercial.
an expansion of net metering via industrial entities, which are somewhat defined in the bill, although it is somewhat vague. So, on this bill, I'm going to call on Representative Doug Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I motion SB 79 ITL.
Chair recognizes Representative Plauché.
I second the ITL on SB 79.
It's moved and seconded that we ITL Senate Bill 79. Discussion, Representative Doug Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In addition to what was discussed from the previous bill, this is a case of for-profit organizations that would be profiting from this bill at the expense of our ratepayers. I don't believe that's particularly fair, and for that reason, we should ITL this bill.
Further discussion, Representative Lewicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this applies to both bills. Reductio ad absurdum is a valid logical proof, taking things to the extreme and saying, well, what happens if everybody goes solar or whatever, and we still have to maintain baseload? It doesn't make any difference whether we are talking about it at just one level or some small one, but that reductio ad absurdum is a valid proof, and if it is true for at the extreme, it's also true for a limited case.
Thank you. Good point. Additional discussion on the motion of ITL. Representative Plauché.
As we've seen, RSA 362, it's been enacted for, what's the title? A Limited Electrical Energy Producers Act. As we see, the Capitol is trying to get its nose under the tent everywhere. These two bills are an example of it.
Thank you. Additional discussion. Representative McGee.
My point would be that this is another effort to try and spur competition and fuel diversity and local sustainable energy so that we are not as beholden to the kinds of price spikes that we had last year. So we have a difference of opinion of how to view solving for that problem. But I think, you know, in my caucus, we're firmly of the opinion that if folks want to contribute to the market, that we should enable it so that they have a cost structure that allows them to do so, because it will be helpful to the state of New Hampshire. And in the case of SB 79, we heard from two of our largest long-term businesses, and it was excellent testimony, as was what was submitted to us, in support of the fact that they are desperate for us to allow them to participate in creating that competitive market. So there is another way to look at this, which is not that we're preventing people from being harmed by market competition, but that we are enabling market competition for the downward pressure that it puts on the cost of energy. And that's how I view it.
Thank you. Further discussion. Representative Munns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We like to talk about New Hampshire being a business-friendly state. But one of the things when businesses are surveyed throughout the state and asked what are the things that determine whether they will expand here or remain here, two of the most important items are workforce and energy costs. One of the least important is taxes. And yet we are very willing to give businesses tax reductions that they don't want. But when it comes to giving them the opportunity to address one of the biggest costs that they face by enabling them to do net metering if they want to and receive the benefits of net metering, somehow we're unwilling to do that. And that just doesn't make sense to me.
Representative Bernardi.
Again, I must say that nothing in our current law prevents any business from building any solar system or wind system that they have the land and a proper zoning to address. Nothing at all. If they want to do that to reduce their costs, they are more than welcome to do it.
To follow up on Representative Bernardi's comment, it would seem, since companies are free to do this, if they're not doing it because they want a subsidy, that kind of proves the case that net metering is indeed a subsidy. Otherwise, people would just go ahead and build solar and not worry about getting net metering subsidies. Isn't that the case, Representative Bernardi?
I concur with that assessment 100%.
Representative Corman.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out that we did have testimony from John Morrison of Hitchner Manufacturing, and he gave us a letter that was supported by Hitchner and 8 other companies, one of which was Stonyfield, which also gave us their own letter. So Stonyfield supports this, Stonyfield Organic. And then also we had the Business and Industry Association in favor of this bill, the entire BIA.
So the question occurs then, if it's good business to expand solar, but not good business to expand solar unless you get a subsidy, is that really good business? Representative Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I can relate to this just recently. In fact, it was over a week and a half ago. I went on the Tesla's website and I was looking at the really cool solar panels they had and the battery storage they have available to put in your house. And so I was looking at it, and then they have a price structure on their website. It tells you how long you'd make your money back. And for me, it was about 10 years. I'd be able to be positive of my electrical rate. But in that whole time of me buying it and looking at it to purchase it for my house, thinking I'd get my money back in 10 years, not once did I expect the government to pay me for it.
Further comment, further discussion, Representative Partial.
I would suggest the government made the legislation available so you could get a 10-year return on your investment. The same way the government should be making it available for these companies to get a reasonable return on their investment for their solar. And I would also add that when we're already I'm hearing the word subsidy a lot. We're subsidizing the oil industry to the tune of 5.9 trillion every year. And every dollar we send out of state to subsidize oil means that we can't subsidize a homegrown resource such as solar when our businesses are asking for it. And when our businesses are asking for it, it seems the reasonable thing to do is to support homegrown New Hampshire businesses. The return will be there. The employees they'll have more employees, more people spending dollars in the state. It's just common sense. I don't see why there's even any debate on this.
In 2022, according to the Energy Information Administration, which was part of the U.S. Department of Energy, 85% of subsidies went to wind and solar. Representative Bernardi has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I am not aware of any subsidies that go to the oil and gas industry. What we have is an administration that is essentially hostile to the development of oil and gas at this point in time, not subsidizing it.
There are oil and gas depreciation allowances, which are covered by the Energy Information Administration, but those are depreciation basically of assets, similar to what any other business does. Representative Doug Thomas.
Thank you. Just to add to that, what I would say is that all of what was just said about subsidies, that's at the federal level. The state does not give any subsidies to the oil industry, and that's a totally different animal. We have the control over the federal.
Representative Kaplan.
I would just suggest, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just suggest that the price structure that we set up for net metering can't be counted as a subsidy. It's just the price structure that the market has set up, and it's been enabled by the state. And if that is determined to be faulty, then we should reset the price structure. But that you can't call it a subsidy if the state has set up a price.
Representative Harrington.
I agree with what your opening statement, that we're not going to change anybody's mind here. So can we just, we're just wasting our time here. Can we move the question?
Okay, I think there's a sentiment that we move the question, so I would like to do that. So I'd ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ITL on Senate Bill 79.
Doug Thomas.
Yes.
Janine Nodder.
Yes.
Michael Harrington.
Yes.
Troy Murner.
Yes.
John Lewicki.
Yes.
Lex Brezhny.
Yes.
J.D. Bernardi, yes. Tom Plauché.
Yes.
James Summers.
Yes.
Kat McGee.
No.
Rebecca McWilliams.
No.
Jackie Cretion.
No.
Lucius Parshall.
No.
Tony Kaplan.
No.
Chris Munns.
No.
Henry Noel.
No.
Wendy Thomas.
No.
Thomas Corman.
No.
Ed Reynolds.
No.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
10-10.
By a vote of 10-10, the motion of ITL fails. Is there any appetite for a motion of OTP or retain?
Well, I'd like to make a motion of OTP. Get it on the record.
Representative McGee moves OTP. Is there a second? Representative McWilliams seconds the motion of OTP. Is there any discussion? Representative McGee.
Yes, I'll just go back to the comment I had when we made the motion to stop. The point that I would make is that when we characterize things as subsidies, saying any money that goes out is a subsidy, I would like to clarify that what we heard Stonyfield and Hitchner saying is that they've already invested in some infrastructure locally in order to try and lower their bills. But what they recognize is that the true value of the energy that they're creating is not something that they're able to recompense with just their individual investment. So if the actual value were being allowed to be submitted to people who invest in that infrastructure in the state, then they would be making their money back quicker, and they would be willing to invest more. And so, and that benefit would inure to everybody in the distribution area in which they reside, unless they're only, as this bill states, only able to net meter up to their own needs in the prior 12 months. So the bill has guardrails, but I would reiterate that they came to us and told us what the problem is. And for us to use vague ideas like it's a subsidy, it's a this, it's a that, just to put a negative connotation on it, we should be listening to the people that are coming in here to give us information about what it's like on the ground.
Representative Lewicki has a comment.
One thing that I believe is the case is that these companies are paying peak billing. Basically, they pay for the maximum amount of electricity. So they have the choice of either stopping production when the sun's not shining or paying for electricity off the grid at the peak rate. And so they're basically in the same situation where they're paying double even if they aren't using the electricity.
I think we're pretty well talked out on this question, so I would ask the clerk now to call the roll on the question about to pass on Senate Bill 79.
Doug Thomas,
No.
Janine Nodder,
No.
Michael Harrington.
No.
Troy Murner,
No.
John Lewicki. No. Lex Brezhny. No. J.D. Bernardi, no. Tom Plauché. James Summers. Kat McGee. Rebecca McWilliams.
Yes.
Jackie Cretion. Lucius Parshall.
Yes.
Tony Kaplan. Chris Munns. Henry Noel.
Yes.
Wendy Thomas.
Yes.
Thomas Corman.
Yes.
Ned Reynolds.
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
No.
10-10.
By a vote of 10-10, the motion of OTP fails. Is there any appetite on the committee for a motion to retain?
No.
Thank goodness. With that, we'll say that the recommendation on the floor will be without recommendation. And Representative Doug Thomas will write the case for the motion of ITL. Who will write the case for the motion of OTP? Representative Reynolds will write the ought to pass case. And I'll remind everyone that your reports are due by 5 p.m. on Thursday, this coming Thursday. So that concludes the exec session on Senate Bill 79, which thankfully concludes our work for the day. So we're out of here by noontime, and we get to enjoy the afternoon, and the weather seems to be improving out there, so maybe we'll get a chance to enjoy some outdoor activity this afternoon. So I want to thank everybody for your hard work getting us to this point, and remind everybody that on Monday, April 24th, there will be a subcommittee meeting of the Senate Bill 54 subcommittee. And the 5 members of the subcommittee will be asking questions and looking for answers. And anybody is welcome to attend that meeting. It'll be right here in this room, starting at 9 a.m. on the 24th. And anybody is welcome to be here and participate.
Can we ask the PSC commissioner to be there?
Yes, we will ask the POC to be there as well. So, although they won't be able to comment on an open docket, but Representative Doug Thomas has an announcement. Did his microphone appear to be not working?
Did everybody hear me at the time?
Did everybody hear his announcement? Okay. His mic doesn't seem to be working right. Testing, testing.
Testing, testing.
There you go.
Light was on, nobody was home though.
All right. Are there